Soames was the home of the Pokanockets and the Seekonks and 12,000 years of Native American or indigenous, whatever you prefer. They crossed the river from Providence right here. This is where we are. So Roger crossed tonight at the ford, right, Roger? Good. And at high tide, it's easy. So here we are with John McNiff. And John McNiff is a local fellow. He's a Warwick native. He got his first degree at Rick. And then he took himself off to England to do some archaeology work. And then he earned a master's in anthropology at SUNY New York. And along the way, he knew he was an actor. Maybe you always knew you were an actor. Maybe at 4 years old, you knew you were an actor. But when the National Park Service made the Roger Williams National Park a reality, this man was the obvious choice to live and breathe Roger Williams. And he has done that to the extent where when you look at him, there he is. There he is. So we're going to be transported to nearly 400 years ago. And this, where we are right now, was a very, very important site. I want you to remember that. This is an important site where we are. It was the crossing ground from Providence to the South Country, to the seat of power in Bristol for the Native American. This is heady repercussions. And Roger Williams stepped right into the thick of things. But first of all, he built himself a cellar hole and some kind of rudimentary place to live and put crops in the ground on our Roger Williams Avenue, right next to the spring and across from the back cove. And then after he'd gotten all these people there, he was told that he was in the wrong spot. And so Roger is going to take us from there. I give you Roger Williams.
Thank you, Mom. Good evening, all. Can you all hear me? Yes. Excellent. I have been asked to talk to you about mine own self today. And to do this proper, I should tell you about where I come from and the background thereabouts and why we are not in England at this time. Does that sound well?
Yes.
Excellent. There was a great war in England in between two houses, the Lancaster and the Yorks. The War of the Roses, they do call it now. But eventually, great King Henry VII did win and start a new dynasty upon the throne of England. And Henry VII had two sons. The first, Arthur. He was to be the next king. And his second son was also named Henry. And Henry, knowing that he was not to be king, and knowing that he was a great prince, decided to enjoy himself. Henry was a great tall man, 6'4", well over 200 pounds. He was an athlete. He was the greatest tennis player in all of England. Perhaps because he was the prince. But he also was involved in a sport that near any of you, I think, have ever seen or participated in, and that is jousting. When one gets suited up in armor, upon a horse with a long lance, and you ride at another person suited up in armor, upon a horse with a long lance, and you try and knock each other off of the horses. Think this now. At the end of the lance is not a point, for they are not at war. This is a sport. At the end of a lance is what seems to be a fist. And that is going as fast as a horse rides. And it is another horse riding the other way. So the impact is like running into a wall, but in a very small spot. This is what he did for fun, for that is the kind of person he was. He spent well, he ate well. He was an athlete, so he ate a lot. And then, very unfortunately, his brother died. Arthur died. Arthur had the promise of being the great king of England. Thinking back in your minds to King Arthur, this was the promise. And with him dead, Henry knew that he must next be king. Now, I dare say most of you do know his name. He is not Henry VII, he is Henry the
Eighth.
Yes. And Henry VIII, to cement a relationship with Spain, married his brother's wife, Catherine, daughter of the King of Spain. Some were upset at this, but Catherine and Henry seemed to enjoy each other's company. They had a daughter, Mary. And for nigh on 20 years, they did celebrate themselves as a wonderful, happy couple. Henry was given an award by the Pope as a defender of the faith. A great red cross in the middle of the white field that became an English flag. But Henry, being the kind of fellow he was, wanted a son. This to prevent any more civil war in between warring houses meeting on the battlefield in England of English blood. For a daughter is not supposed to be the next in line for the throne. And if he had no son, there would be arguments of this sort. Henry wanted a son. And being the kind of person he was, he blamed Catherine for not having the son. So he sought an annulment from the Pope. Now, the Pope and the King of Spain were very close relations. And so the Pope refused the divorce. Henry, being the kind of person he was, divorced England from the Rome. Said now all the property, all the monasteries, all the people, now no longer are members of the Roman Catholic Church. We will establish the Church of England. And Henry, being the kind of person he was, put himself in charge of the Church of England. And promptly divorced himself. He marries young Anne Boleyn, beautiful woman, young, in the prime of her life, and they have another daughter. Henry gets tired of Anne Boleyn, and within a year and a half has her head chopped off. Henry eventually had 6 wives. Divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. And in that process did have a son, Edward. When Henry did die, Edward became king. And Edward had no love for the Church of England, nor for the Roman Catholic Church. He liked the Presbyterian Church. So now, everyone in England is taken from all those churches and now must become Presbyterian. Edward is only king for 7 years. When he dies, Mary becomes queen. Mary, with the ties to the Roman Catholic Church, wants everyone in England to go back to the Roman Catholic Church, seizes the properties back, gives it back to the Roman Catholic Church, seizes the monasteries, the lands, the incomes, back to the Roman Catholic Church, and then proceeds to be prosecutorial in her conduct towards any of the Presbyterians or the Church of England members, going out there and earning herself a nickname.
Bloody Mary.
I'm glad you people are up on your histories. Bloody Mary. But she is only queen for 5 years. When she dies, her sister Elizabeth becomes queen. Elizabeth wants to be seen as a strong, independent woman. She wants everyone to look upon her and see her father, Henry VIII. So she brings everyone back to the Church of England. And there is persecution. There are other groups and sects and religions growing up in England at this time. There's a group over here called the Puritans. That's not a name that they like, but they wish to purify that Church of England. That the Church of England they saw as being Roman Catholic but without a pope. They wanted to purify it, bring it back to its roots, simplify it, get rid of the holidays, the vestments, the special celebrations, all of those things, and get it back to its very roots in Scripture. There were Anabaptists who felt that no child should be baptized and it should be just adults who are educated. There were all different kinds of religious groups. But there was one official religion. And the Queen was at its head. You see, in these days, everyone looked at the universe as being part of the great chain of being. There is God at its head, followed by the angels, and then kings and emperors, the clergy, the upper classes, the middle classes, the lower classes, and then the flying animals, the walking animals, the crawling animals, and it goes on and on and on. Everything had its place in the world. And a member of the royal family, the queen, the king, the emperor, is God's intermediary between you, the people, and God. You must do what they say, for they cannot be wrong, for they are the king or the queen. And they are the king or the queen because God likes them. Elizabeth brought everyone back to the Church of England and reigned for nigh unto 50 years. Seeing that she wanted to be seen as a strong and independent woman, she never married, never needed a man to help her run all England. But that brought up the old problem. Who was in line for the throne? With no legitimate heirs, and it was again appearing to be up for grabs as Elizabeth got older and older and older. She had a cousin. He was King James VI of Scotland, just to the north. And James was brilliant with politics. And he made agreements with all the different religious groups. Support me to become king. You will not be persecuted when I become king. Support me to become king. Suffer no persecutions. As you have seen, from Henry to Mary to Elizabeth, support me. There will be no persecutions. Not only was he good at politics, he was a good salesman. For all these different religious groups did support him. And upon the death of Elizabeth, James VI of Scotland becomes James I of England and promptly breaks every single one of those promises. The first to rebel are the Roman Catholics. They planned to blow up the entire British government. House of Lords, House of Commons, royal family, and then plant a Spanish princess on the throne of England. Puritans are causing all kinds of trouble. James wants his own version of the Church of England. He doesn't want to inherit a Tudor version. He wants a Stuart version of the Church of England. Goes about rewriting everything, including having his own version of the Bible published. The King James Version. This is the world I grew up in. Every time the monarch changes, your faith is supposed to change. What does that mean? You're set for 50 years with Elizabeth, and upon her death, everything that you've been doing your entire life was wrong, and now you must correct yourself with a new monarch? I was not the only one that was upset with this. Many people were leaving England. There was a group that went to Holland, came back to England, and came across the Great Ocean in 1620 and landed at Plymouth. It takes 2 months to get across that ocean. 2 months. Here we are at the end of October. Go back to the very beginning. Go back to the end of September, the end of August. Think the end of summer, the end of August. Think of everything that you've had to eat from the end of August until today. Dry it, smoke it, salt it, pack it into wooden barrels and put it in the bottom of the ship. Everything you have had to drink day or night from the end of August until today. Into wooden barrels and into the bottom of the ship. 100 people in an area the size of this room with a much lower ceiling. For 2 months, you are packed in here together. No one has had a bath. You're wearing clothing that is made out of wool and linen. How many people have spent time upon the ocean? Anyone? What happens to your clothing when you're out on the ocean? They get wet. Do you know what wool smells like when it's wet? So there's 100 wet dogs in here that have not had a bath in 2 months. Have we had any bad weather? On land, they may rattle the windows, knock trees over. On the ocean, it picks the ocean up itself. And now the boat is being played with the way a cat plays with a mouse. What was the deck is now the bulkhead, and everything is topsy-turvy. For 2 months you go through this. And then when you get here, the cold goes right through you. Ice daggers through your hands, your arms, your ears, your legs, your feet. No place to go to get warm. The food has rotted halfway across. You have the choice of eating rotten food or eating nothing at all. The water went bad long before that. The sailors are not giving you the beer that you need. And then when you get off these ships, there's nothing here. No place to go to get new clothing because they are rotting off your bodies as you stand there. No place to go to warm up. You can build a fire, but it's snow on the ground. In London, if it snows, it's this much and then disappears overnight. Here, it'll snow up to your hips and not disappear for the whole winter. And then, please, the summers. The summers here are so stifling hot. I do not understand how anyone does survive this. But there were many people in England that were so motivated that they had to leave England, not because they sought freedom, but because they sought to escape persecution. There's a great difference here, because many of the people, they go to Plymouth, they go 10 years later to Boston and Salem. They were not searching for freedom. These were gentlemen, young gentlemen, if I may say, that knew they were right. They were 25 to 30 years old, and they knew they were right. They were so motivated in their righteousness that they would go to a new world. Literally. And when they got here, from their point of view, it had been cleared for them. Talking to the Pokanoket leaders, a great disease had swept through most of the people, from north of Salem down through the entire Cape, just years before those settlers came to Plymouth and killing 60 to 90% of the entire population. 60 to 90%. So, of course, when those people settled at Plymouth, later at Boston and Salem, they say that the world has been cleared for them. The land has been cleared for them. That was God's hand that did wipe the population off the map for them. They are that clear in knowing that they are right. This is the world that I came into. These people had been my friends in England. But what they did when they came here, instead of starting something brand new, they recreated the system in England. To be able to vote in Massachusetts Bay, you must be a member of the church. To be a member of the church, you must have a conversion experience. For it to be acceptable, the members of the church must know about it, listen to your explanation of it, and accept it. If you hold opinions diverging from the opinions of the magistrates, do you think they will accept your conversion experience? No. The only ones that get accepted into their church are the ones that think like them or can be made to think like them. They are tying something so precious, one's faith, into something so base, running the world. You have exhibited knowledge of history. If anyone can know of any government throughout world history that was without corruption, please raise your hand. None. And at best, when a government is working, it is when they make compromises, yes? Where you give up something, so I give up something, and we both get along, yes? If you're giving up something, if you're compromising your faith, how good is it? That's what happens. They asked me to be their minister, and in this situation, I could not. I went to Salem, I went to Plymouth, and started preaching ideas that were, how does one say this, against the mainstream. I did say that a minister should not be paid. That makes you a mercenary. You should be a working member of the community and minister in addition to your working days. Which means I need a job. I'm a city boy from London. I do not know how to farm, I do not know how to hunt, I do not know how to fish, but I do know how to trade. So I took English goods, knives, kettles, hoes, axes, blankets, coats, and I went out among the Wampanoag and the Narragansett. To trade with them, I did use an old trick from London. If an Italian boat with silks from the Far East comes into the docks at London, who gets first crack at the silks? The man on the dock that speaks Italian. If a Dutch boat comes in with fine linens, who gets first crack? The one that speaks Dutch. So I did learn their language here. And in the process, does anyone here speak more than one language? When you learn a new language, it's not just word substitution. There are entire concepts and phrases that have to be put next to each other and compared as being almost equal. They don't really fit together, but that's the closest you can get. Here's a perfect example. In English, we have a sheet of paper, yes? As precious as it is a sheet of paper. You also have a sheet on your bed. You have a sheet of ice outside. It's a large, flat thing that covers something else, yes? In French, the very same item is not a sheet. Une feuille de papier, a leaf of paper. Now, all those images that you have in your head in English about a sheet, everything that a sheet does is now changed. By that simple, it's not word substitution anymore. This is a leaf of paper. And now it brings in all those things that are leaf-like, floating, dancing in the wind. Look outside, you can see them. When you learn another language, you learn about the people, and I learned about the native peoples that lived here, how they hunt, how they fish, how they farm, how they live. And learned that if you want to live here, this is their land. Make a deal with them for it. You can't just come here with a flag in hand and say, the king has said I may live here. It's not the king's to give away. And when I did say that, I got myself into more trouble. I left Plymouth and went back up to Salem, preaching these dangerous ideas, as you might conceive, that a minister should not be paid. I wrote a letter to King Charles I in England, telling him that he is committing a sin by giving away things like native land that do not belong to him. This did not go well. Then, I did criticize the magistrates at Boston with something that they did not like at all. I said that a government can control what you do, but not what you think or what you believe. That is up to you. This idea is a stretch, a small stretch, from my mentor, Sir Edward Coke, Chief Justice of England. He said, a man's home is his castle. How then cannot a man's soul be their own to determine what happens to it? This was too much, and the magistrates did have me arrested and tried. And my crime was having new and dangerous opinions against their authority. They did toss me out. And in January, dressed not dissimilar to this, in hip-deep snow, in cold so much that the entire bay had froze over, I started walking. I would have froze to death within a day or two. But a hunting party of native peoples did find me and take me in, bring me down to this area. In the springtime, I did talk with Wassamequin, the leader of the Wampanoag and the Pokanoket here. He did give me land. He did call it New Providence. He said, here we may have a settlement. People from Salem came down. We started building and planting when the governor at Plymouth sent me a kind letter saying, we are friends, but you are still within the bounds of the Plymouth colony, and as much as we are friends, we are more friendly with Boston. If you just go across the river, we may all live as good neighbors. So I did that. I got into a boat and went across the river, just upstream from here. There's a large rock jutting out into the water, and I did greet and hallow some of the native peoples that were there, some Narragansett. Now a story is built up around this. What cheer is a good standard English greeting? It is something that I have been hallowed with by native peoples many times. Nitop is their word for friend. But they did greet me, and I did go to the rock, explain the situation. And they did explain that I should go around the point and come up the next river. There was a great salt cove with salmon, oysters, lobsters, crabs. A freshwater spring, a perfect place. And I did make a deal with the leaders of the Narragansett for that land there. From the falls at Pawtucket to Nutaconkinut Hill in the west, to the falls at Patuxet. That they would give me this. And in return, they could have any of the English goods that I had. The leaders of the Narragansett, Canonicus and Miantanomi, they could have any of those English goods anytime they wanted. And I would advocate for them with the other English. I would write letters for them. I would translate for them. I would be their emissary. And we would live as neighbors here. This was a place where finally we're outside of English jurisdiction. This is the place with the, this is the tabula rasa. This is the blank slate. Here there are no rules unless we make them. And the first one we made was that we will make decisions in the town of Providence by the majority vote of the heads of households for our own benefit, for our own protection. But only in civil things. We would make no religious rules. This was extraordinary. Remember I mentioned that great chain of being where the rulers are placed there by God. Well, here, we were making our own decisions. Another fellow being tossed out of just about everywhere he went to, Samuel Gorton, being tossed out of Plymouth, out of Portsmouth, tried to come into Providence and was refused. He settled down at Patuxet and then Warwick. We're all rebels of a sort, all wishing to have nobody tell us how to think and believe. And I made 2 trips back to England because the Plymouth colony, the Massachusetts Bay colony, and the New Connecticut colony wanted Narragansett Bay. In the age of sail, this is the perfect place to sail down to the southern colonies, to the Caribbean, to all these places where money was being made. If you look at Connecticut, you cannot sail from there anywhere. There's an island in the way. If you're sailing out of Boston or Plymouth, you have to go outside the Cape, outside the islands, outside the shoals, and then you're in the middle of great streams in the ocean going the other way. Great to go back to England, but very bad to go south. We had great princes and people, the Narragansett, that half the state belonged to them. They had submitted themselves to the king in 1642. That they were English subjects as much as we were. 2 trips back to England. 2 trips with that 2-month going over, 2-month coming back, 2-month going over, 2-month coming back. Spending 2 years or more there. Having to come back because of turmoil within the colony, leaving John Clark as our agent there to negotiate. In 1663, finally, Rhode Island received a charter from the king. Documentation giving permission for Rhode Island to be its own colony, with borders, with a government set up with more liberty than any place in the old world or the new. Here, we could elect our own governor. Not a royal governor appointed, but elect our own governor. One of us was going to be chosen by us to run our own affairs. Our General Assembly, not appointed by a king, not appointed by God, but people like us, elected by us, sent to represent ourselves in our own government. This was an extraordinary level of freedom, not seen anywhere else. It did cause all kinds of jealousies. New Jersey, the Carolinas, they both wanted the same thing that we had. This is a fragile experiment. Without all of you on guard for it, someone will come and take it from you, pluck it from your hands, pluck it from your heart. We fought hard for this. If you do not stand on guard, they will take it from you. I have done what I can. The rest is all up to you. Thank you. Does anyone have questions?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
How could you negotiate with the Indians who didn't speak English?
I learned their language.
They had various languages.
Well, most of them speak the same language, if you would, from Maine down to the Carolinas.
Not at that time.
Aye, they did. Aye, they did. From Maine to the Carolinas and inland as far as, well, as the Great River, if you would. They all speak the same language, different dialects, the same way there are different places in England where you can understand one and not the other. For example, the word that the Narragansett use for dog is anum, and that the Wampanoag use is apum. A slight pronunciation difference, but that is it. Here's another one. At the Connecticut line, there is a place called Pawcatuck. And just north of here, there's a place called Pawtucket. Dialect difference, meaning the same thing. A freshwater river goes over a waterfall into salt water. So it's the same language with dialect differences. Yes, ma'am?
What was that language? Was it Algonquin?
Algonquian. Yes, sir?
How old were you in 1636?
1636, so that'd be 33.
Were you married when you came, sir?
Across the ocean, yes. Mary was with me. In the back there, sir.
Yes, I want to thank you for a very little known fact about you, that you were the first real abolitionist in America, and that's a big thing.
Well, you must understand, and I'm going to do something very difficult here. I'm going to take my hat off and be John McNiff for a second. Roger was not necessarily an abolitionist. There was a role for slavery, and the role was they didn't have prisons. So, if you were a debtor and you owed somebody money, you would work for them for until you paid it off. If you had gone bankrupt, something severe, if you had committed a crime they would normally today send people to prison for, quite often you would have what's called involuntary indenture. And they would send you to a colony somewhere, and you would have a term of about 10 years that you would have to serve involuntary indenture. That's what Georgia was all for. Involuntary indenture in Georgia. Roger Williams had a servant who was, instead of having an orphanage, he had a servant, Thomas Angel. What they did do here in Rhode Island in 1652 is abolish permanent slavery, which was something that was becoming common in Massachusetts and the other colonies, as they mentioned, stealing people from Africa and having them come here and be permanent slaves. That's something that was abominable for Roger. But to give an idea, he was not against slavery in and of itself. That's what you did when you defeated an enemy. For example, when Cromwell defeated the Irish, took 40,000 Irish and sold them down into the Caribbean as slaves. That's where you get all the wonderful names and some of the accents down there. Yes, sir?
I know I'm getting the name wrong, but is it Ann Huntington?
Hutchinson.
Hutchinson.
Yes.
Was she friends with you?
We knew her. We knew her. We didn't necessarily agree philosophically with her, but we did know her. She was in Boston about the same time I was up in Salem. We know many of the same people, and some of the people that came down from Boston with her were instrumental in trying to get me removed from the Massachusetts Bay Colony. William Coddington, for one. He is no great friend of mine. Yes, ma'am?
So you established your home where the well is, where the national park is now?
Across the street from that, yes.
Okay, so when did you open your first trading post down?
The one down to Wickford.
Yes. Did you live there, or was that strictly, did you have somebody else representing you as a trader?
Yes. Yes. It is, I would spend months down there, because that is near the heart of Narragansett territory. And I would go down there, it would be a place to live, but it is not a house. I did not have a house there, I had a trading post, which is, it lacks the comfort of a home.
Right.
And I would spend several months down there, and it would get me away from the hubbub of these people in this town.
Yes.
And it also allowed me to be close to people that, to give you an idea, 1660, there's about 1,500 English in all of the colony of Rhode Island and Providence Plantation. 1,500. There's nigh on to 20,000 Narragansett.
Yeah.
And it's down in Narragansett territory.
But it was during the King Philip's War that house in Wickford was burnt down, right?
Most of Wickford was burned, aye.
Okay.
And Providence too.
In Providence,
Yep.
okay.
In the back.
Now, you've got to turn your memory back 400 years. There was a man, his name was John Houston Wood the Mariner. Right? He owned a ship, and you asked him to take an oath of freeman. Would you explain to people what a freeman was? And also, did you happen to be, when you went back to England, where he owned 2 ships, did you happen to be on one of them? That part's pretty hard.
The second part, no, I was not on one of his ships, for I did go to New Amsterdam to get on
Okay,
ships.
yes, and he had a place there too.
But as far as a freeman's oath, Massachusetts has a wonderful freeman's oath that you swear by God that you will be a good citizen subject to the rules of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And I did take issue with this. For if Massachusetts Bay is having people swear by God that they will be a good citizen, what do they do when they have someone who's not eligible to be a member of their church swear by God? They're having an unredeemed soul swear by God is forcing that person to take the Lord's name in vain. Therefore, the colony is forcing people to sin just to be a free person. I took great issue with the Massachusetts Bay Freeman's Oath. Here, a freeman's oath is a swear that, as we did originally when we came together, that we will decide things by the majority vote of the heads of households, but only in civil things. And adjoining to that compact, if you would. Yes, Mom?
Rumor has it that you weren't too friendly with Samuel Gordon.
Samuel Gordon was a difficult fellow.
Yeah,
He's not a bad fellow, he's just a
no,
difficult
but
fellow.
rabble-rousing.
He was, well, we're all rabble-rousers of some sort.
Well, quite a
He's,
guy.
he's the only one that got Massachusetts Bay to send troops and have a gunfight with him. He's the only one that succeeded in getting tossed out of almost every single English settlement until he founded one of his own. I do disagree heartily with many of his religious ideas, but his social ideas do seem to fit closer to what we have been doing here.
Did you kind of kick him out of Providence?
We did not allow him into Providence.
That's right.
Yes.
You kind of kicked him down to
Well,
south of the river?
we said, not here, just a little bit south. That'll be fine. He went down to Patuxet, where he did run into problem with Arnold and Harris, which just about everyone runs into trouble with Arnold and Harris. So he moved a little bit further south to the place called Charlemont. Later, after his successes, he named it after his sponsor back there at court, the Earl of Warwick. Hence the name of the place becoming Warwick. Yes, sir?
Is it more appropriate to say grace before the meal or after the meal?
Are you talking to a single family unit or are you talking to a gathering of peoples? And are you saying that there should be someone to lead this grace? Or, what do you think as Matthew says? If you're going to be praying, go to your quiet place and pray. Which would you do? You say it in your heart if you're in a great community. If you're with your family, you join hands and thank God for everything you have at that table. Yes, sir.
Was you alive when the Browns were alive? Because
like you said you did not believe in permanent slavery.
Right.
But the Browns, Rhode Island was the worst slave state in the North and at the time.
I shall do two things right here. Chad Brown was one of the early settlers here, and his property was right along the waterfront there and did come up the Great Hill. I will give you that. Chad Brown was a good enough fellow. We saw no evil distinction in him, if you would. Hi. The Brown brothers, great slavers. Moses went on one slaving voyage and was so disgusted by it, by the things that he saw, that he became not only a Quaker but an abolitionist as well. John Brown defended slavery the whole rest of his life going into the 1800s. Roger was not around for any of that. These are like the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren of Chad Brown. But Brown University is right in the center. College Street goes right up the hill. That's where Chad Brown's house lot was. So it was family land that was donated for Brown University. The major Brown brothers, and not counting the others. John Brown ran things in Providence almost like he was the copy to tutti copy. He was the boss of bosses. He was, you running a ship out of Providence, you talked to John Brown. Even after the Revolution, he was like that. There was a theater that wanted to have performances on Benefit Street. And the people of Providence were disgusted with this idea of actors. I mean, there's such a low life. I mean, there are places in society, gypsies are up here compared to actors. But John Brown liked to see plays. So he took one of his cannons from his house, loaded it, rolled it down the hill in front of the theater, and stood there with a lit match as the crowd came at him to shut down the theater. He said, "Come on, make my day." He's a character. He's bigger than life. He's 6'3". But throughout his whole life, he's defending something that most of us find totally indefensible. Did that answer your question?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Yes, Mom?
What role, if any, did you play in the King Philip's War?
This is a heartbreak. But these are all my friends. Before the war started, there had been rumors of war, there had been struggles. It was about real estate, if you would, in between Philip and Plymouth. Philip coming up and saying, "I cannot live until we have no more land." Well, several of us got together and we petitioned Governor Andros in New York to come and act as an outside arbitrator and sit down between the two factions that settled this thing. And by June of 1675, we had thought that, well, I had actually written that the storm has passed. They've made an agreement. They will not have a war. I spoke too soon. Small incident in Swansea. Blood was shed. Philip sent his old men, women, and children to go live with the Narragansett as refugees, while he and 80 warriors did set off and start fires. 80 warriors against the force of England here. It was a guerrilla war. They did attack people walking down the avenues. They did attack people in the fields. They did burn farmhouses and settlements. Started in June. By October, the English were thinking that this is going to get really serious if things change in the spring. So they did send for the Narragansett to send emissaries to Boston to sign a treaty that they would not be involved in this war, that they would stay neutral, which the Narragansett gladly did. They did not want to have a war. They signed the paperwork as it was explained to them that they would stay neutral. And they came back to southern Rhode Island. And almost as soon as they got back, they were presented with, one more thing. You must turn over those Wampanoag refugees as hostages. You've given them shelter. You've taken them in. They're old men, women, and children. To do this would be dishonorable. So their answer was not a Wampanoag, nor the paring of a Wampanoag's nail. You insult us by even asking this. Boston took this as a sure sign that the Narragansett would side with Philip in the springtime. So they did organize the United Colonies, as they call them, Connecticut, Plymouth, and Massachusetts Bay. Get 1,000 soldiers and invaded Rhode Island and attacked the Narragansett stronghold in the Great Swamp in December of 1675, killing 700 men, women, and children. At this, Canonchet, the war leader of the Narragansett, assembled an army of 2,000 warriors in southern Rhode Island. He assembled another army of 2,000 warriors up near Mount Wachusett, and they did begin a slow march of devastation. Think this, the great United Colonies army is 1,000 soldiers. Now, starting from near the Great Swamp, there are 2,000 native soldiers marching up the west side of the bay, burning everything in their path. Coming from Mount Wachusett, marching eastward towards Plymouth, another army of 2,000 native soldiers marching there, burning everything. From Providence, you could see the fires all along the coast coming up. Patuxent was burned, Warwick was burned, everything. It was one house in Warwick that survived. When they got to Providence, they did array themselves on the great hill where the plain is. And I did go out to speak to them and started by scolding them, telling them that they were in a very bad place, which they agreed. Then we tried to change their mind and told them if 100 Englishmen against 100 of them, we'd be able to win any day. And they said, bring 100 English up onto this plain tomorrow morn. So I went back to what I could do, was negotiate. I said, give me your demands. We shall write this down. We'll get a runner to get this up to Boston. We have this settled in a day or two before anyone else needs to die. They said, talk to us in a month after we burned Plymouth. They had done their talking. They had signed their treaties. And they were attacked. This was end of March, 1676. Within 2 months, Canonchet was captured and executed. These armies fell apart because it was his charisma, his personality that held these armies together. Within 2 months, all that is gone. Another month or so after that, Philip is not even captured. He's shot down at the swamp down in Bristol. Now, down in Newport, nigh unto 500 Native American that are held captive. Some are warriors, some are family. Everyone in New England has lost just about everything. Their livelihood, their homes, family members, both native and English. They've lost just about everything. Groups of native peoples that had surrendered are coming in with their papers, with the white flag, saying they have done their work. And they're slaughtered on the side of the road. We have 500 now held down in Newport. What should we do with them? What should we do with them?
Isn't that when you put them in servitude to the people that lost their land?
Not here.
Oh, they sold them.
We had that problem with the Pequot War, where they just walked away. This is their land. They know it better than we do. If we let them go, they'll either start the war back up, or they'll be killed by other English. Most of the English just want to have them stand there and have their throats slit as they stand, so that the bay runs red, as a reminder to anyone that stands up against the English. Remember, the Narragansett were English subjects. This is not seen as war against England. This is seen as treason. The decision was made to sell them into slavery down in the Caribbean. It only goes to prove that in warfare, it's quite often there are no good choices. It's the worst thing a person can do to another person. And these were friends of mine. So that's what I did in the war. Anyone else? Questions, thoughts? Yes, Mom?
On a lighter note,
Certainly.
what was Mary up to when you were out gallivanting around England?
She's running everything. She was beautiful. She was wonderful. She was, Mary had a heart for business, had a heart for being hard, if you would. When I escaped Salem She was there in Salem with the house. And the soldiers came and barged on the door to demand entry. She opens the door and forces them back out into the cold, saying, "I will not have soldiers come into my house. I am a married woman. You shall not come in here without a chaperone." She was not going to lose her reputation having soldiers into her house. It took them several hours to find good chaperones for the entire group. In that meantime, I was on my way. So that's the kind of person she was. When I was over in England, she was running things here, keeping the family alive, keeping the livelihood of the entire estate, if you would. She was wonderful.
Excuse me, you traded with the Indians for
Yes.
English goods.
Yes.
Did you have some connection in England ahead of time?
There are small connections back and forth, but I'll tell you that just about everyone was awfully glad to get beaver pelts. And so just the fact that you had them was a guarantee that you would have things to trade for. There were entire towns eventually set up in England to create trade goods just to be given to the native peoples. Entire factories made just for that purpose. Making brass kettles, making beads even, making small knives. Whereas a blacksmith normally will operate his shop in a town and make a knife when someone needs it. Now there was demand not for one knife, not for 10 knives, but for hundreds of knives or axes. And it became industry. So these things were being shipped over here, and if you had goods to trade for them, like food and furs, you were first in line to receive them.
So they would just kept coming once
Kept
it
coming.
started.
Absolutely. There was no cash. No cash money, no specie coming over here, no gold or silver. For the king wished to keep that at home in England. So it was goods coming over here that we could trade. And after a while, the native peoples, their wampum pig was standardized and became used as money among the English and Dutch in this area, and French to the north.
Did you row a boat from Providence to Newport to debate the Quakers?
Yes, I did.
Quakers, tell them about Quakers.
Quakers, the Society of Friends. George Fox did establish them here in Newport about, 1670 or so. I do not know the exact date. But hearing that George Fox was there, here's my opportunity to debate with the founder of this movement, just nail him down to some facts. So I did get into a boat here in Providence. And not just row, but sail too, down the east side of the bay. Many people think that I would have gone down the other side, but why? Here I could be 5-10 feet off the shore the entire way, going all the way down to Newport. George Fox had left by the time I got there. But I had 3 days of debate with the Quakers there. Turned around, came back up to Providence, had another debate with them up here, and did write a book that is a point-by-point argument about why the Quakers are wrong. It's called George Fox, Digged Out of His Burrows. See, these are people who believe in the inner light, the direct inspiration from God rather than Scripture. That's where our big problem was. Plus, they are disruptive to society, refuse military service, etc., etc., etc. Yes, Mom?
You, Roger, when you were rowing your boat to Newport.
Yeah. Well, if it's 1607, I'm close to 70 years old. Oh, it's a small boat. Just me and my books. Yes, sir?
Economically, what did your family do when you were gone for 2 or 3 years? There's no hard cash.
No, there is no hard cash.
You know, they really didn't have any big farms or anything to.
You don't need big. Think about this now. That Great Salt Cove there is a tremendous amount of food right at your doorsteps. The fresh water is just there. You need to make sure that what you are growing is good. Whether you have animals and tending to them, whether it's goats, sheep, pigs. A dozen pigs can take care of you for an entire winter. Sheep, 2 or 3 dozen sheep, you can get that wool and then trade that for eggs and cheeses and things of that nature. It does not take a lot to get through things. Mary could weave, she could sew, she could take in projects from other people and take care of them. This is not, the work itself is hard, but the prospect of having work to do, there was always something. And the children are always chopping wood. Yes, sir.
How many children did you have?
6. And don't go into the names, you know. 6. 3 boys, 3 girls. That will suffice. Anyone else?
Was one of them Betsy? Is that why the cottage is in? Okay, who's that?
Betsy is his great-granddaughter.
Great-granddaughter,
Yep.
okay, all right, thank you.
1870s she died and left what had been family farm to the city of Providence.
Right.
The city of Providence refused it twice before finally accepting it. It was too far away. Where Roger Williams Park is,
Yes.
there was family farm.
Right.
And it was offered as a memorial to Roger Williams, to the city of Providence. But when it was first offered in 1870, it was so far away there was no way for anybody to get to it. So the city of Providence said, no, we don't need 500 free acres. Thank you. Keep it. They offered it the next year. No, it's not going to be useful to the city. No, thank you. Keep your 500 acres. The following time, the last time that they offered it, they had finally gotten a streetcar line going out Elmwood Avenue.
Yeah.
Now there's a way to get there.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll take it.
Well, that
Some
would-
things in Rhode Island don't ever change.
That would have all been part of the original property then, right? Because it would have been all the way down to the Patuxent Falls.
Matter of fact, 2 of his children are buried next to the casino there, in that family cemetery.
Okay, all right, thank you. Yeah.
Yes, it was family land.
Yeah.
Yes.
I grew up in Providence, across from the Obadiah Brown
Okay.
farm, which is Triggs Memorial Golf Course. How was he connected
It's much later.
much later?
Yeah, the Brown family started with Chad and just started, figure Obadiah is probably mid-17 into the early 1800s. And, yeah, it's more family land. There's a whole bunch of people. There's still Williamses around. There's still Browns around. You take a look at the list of the original settlers here, you'll find names that are all too familiar to everybody. Yes?
Where are you buried?
Ah, where is Roger buried?
Where is
Yes.
Roger buried? Yes, I think-
He was originally buried in his backyard next to his house. Okay, there were no churchyards, there were no churches in Providence until 1700. That's the first church was built in 1700. So everybody was buried in their own yard.
But where was that area?
It is just uphill from where the spring is along North Main Street. Okay, just uphill next to the Sullivan Door House. And that's the original burial spot. About 1860, that was excavated, and his remains were brought to a crypt in the North Burial Ground, because they were going to build a monument to Roger Williams. But after 1860, something happened in this country that got people distracted. What was that? Civil War. After the Civil War, they were too busy building monuments to the soldiers and sailors that had fought, and they forgot about this bank account that was earning interest until the 300th anniversary of the founding of Providence came along.
Is there a grave site? Is there?
They built Prospect Terrace, where the statue of Roger is.
Yes.
That's his final resting place. Now, the original design for that was going to be so much better. It's about 200 feet above sea level. The original design was to have another 200-foot tall obelisk with a rotating beacon on the top. 400 feet tall in Providence. You know what you can see from the top, and you know what can see you? Boston. That's what they're doing. That was the whole purpose of the monument. Thank you, folks.
I think that's one of the first times the questions have been as good as the presentation. Thank you for those excellent questions and answers. Thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you.